Hello and welcome back. This week we're watching Alex draft the Devoid cube. The Devoid cube is a cube where the gimmick is that every single card is colorless or has Devoid. There's also the usual basic lands are not available to drafters. So you can add wastes to your deck which make colorless mana, but if you want colored mana, you're going to need to draft the lands or some other way of producing it. So he's pulled Tezzeret to the front, taking a look at it. There's a 2 mana ramp spell there as well, an Eldrazi. He was thumbing over a playtest card, but I think he's not enticed by that one. Tezzeret is, when you see new cards in these cubes, it's quite hard to make a choice about them. You don't know for sure if the power level is as high or as low as it looks. You got to play with it to really know, or at least, have it in circulation for a while. So I think a lot of uncertainty about Tezzeret here. Otherwise, Surginger is a pretty reasonable creature just for attacking and blocking. The cube is a bit strange due to the restriction. There's not that much removal, especially cheap removal. Plenty of 1 mana spells, and obviously things are biased towards stuff that usually shows up in colorless. So things like big creatures and mana rocks are a bit more present than usual, and the creatures are a bit smaller than usual. I'd say, there's a lot of 1/1s with some weird ability that fits into a specific strategy. So he's checking out the Ghostfire Slice here, one of the few pieces of efficient removal. Doesn't look like he's too excited by anything in the pack here. I mean, Tezzeret does trigger off of, half of the spells in the cube, so you don't actually have to put any effort into building around it. The question is just, is it a good spell if that happens, compared to something like Ginger that is just putting on a reasonable clock? Is that going to matter? Are things going to be more combo focused? Are there going to be creatures to attack Tezzeret? And it looks like he's tentatively going for Tezzeret. Taking a look through here, there's another. So Bronze Walrus, a little better than normal because it's a source of colored mana, but I'm a bit skeptical of it in this cube. Seed of the Synod synergizes with a lot of stuff, just being a free artifact. Ugin is a bit of a strange card here because his minus ability cannot kill anything in the cube. So effectively, he's just 6 mana for a 2/2 factory that also makes a bunch of mana. I think Worn Powerstone actually would be. Seems like a good fit in this cube. There's a lot of stuff where once you get up to 5, 6, or more mana, the usual inefficiency of colorless cards is less present. But Ugin also a pretty good rate here. Thumbing over a lot of lands. There is a lot of upside to picking lands in this cube. So because there's so many colorless cards, you can play basically any land you pick. The land count is pretty low. And almost all of the lands are strictly better than a waste. So there's never really a situation where you're going to have a bunch of lands in the sideboard that you can't put in your deck. They all offer some kind of utility or upside. And it looks like he's also enticed by the Worn Powerstone. I think pretty reasonable pickup here. Haywire Might, it is locking him into maybe picking up some green sources, but it's a very efficient removal spell. There's a couple of artifacts in the 4+ mana range, but I think the main utility of this is just if your opponent has an artifact land, you get to Stone Rain them, and they're basically out of the game at that point. So if things line up, you can spike a couple of free wins that way. Another tough choice, though. I mean, with Tezzeret in his pool, he doesn't want to fall too far behind on board. Without removal spells, you are kind of relying on blockers to protect your Planeswalkers, or just getting your Planeswalkers out early. And based on some of the more passive abilities in this cube, I'm a bit skeptical of defending Planeswalkers with blockers. So Ugin, maybe a bit worse than it looks. I think he's just clarifying about that third ability not doing anything in the cube. So Haywire Might, probably the higher upside play, and it looks like he's going for it. So he's going to have a lot of playables in this cube, so he's not concerned if he winds up having to cut Haywire Might. But the situation where He has green mana and he can play it. It's really high upside. Ruins of Oran Reef. So I've played this in another cube. It's really overperformed as a land, getting a free counter every time you play a creature. Well, not a free counter, but it's great flexibility on a land. But this might also be a cube where the +1 counter just doesn't matter. So he's checking out the line breaker here. Doing a little research on the cube, seeing what's available if he dips into red. So line breaker, I'm pretty sure this is the one that grants haste. So this can be a real beating with any 4, 5, and 6 mana creatures. He's looking at Duplicate, one of the quite weak cards that you kind of have to play just because it's one of the only removal spells. But, so he's going for the Duplicate. Going to pick up one of the few removal spells in the cube, just cover some problematic large creature. You see Wormcoil Engine pulled to the front, speaking of problematic large creatures. Stonecoil Serpent, also a pretty good rate. Aganjo, good if he's going into white, but it looks like at the moment he's just dipping into green. Monoscallion, a little bit of early interaction. And I think with the Tezzeret in his pool, he might be looking into a bit more of a cantripy artifact creatures, stuff like the Mer Retriever, the Terrarian, just get lots of chump blocks, get lots of triggers on Tezzeret. More consulting the guide. But no real direction for his deck just yet. I mean, Haywire might giving him a payoff for green mana, but otherwise not locked into anything in particular. Walker of the Wastes, just kind of a big trampling creature if you're not picking up too many lands. I think there's a good chance that you wind up with 7 or 8 non-wastes lands, and then, I mean, it's still a 5 mana 7/7 trample at minimum. Well, in a bad case. Still considering these here. I mean, Wormcoil Engine got a very good spread. It's very defensive, hard to manage with blockers, resilient to a lot of removal spells. Though I think in this cube there's a lot of removal spells that exile anyway, so the Death Trigger probably not coming up unless it's being Desperation blocked. But we see him picking up Waterlogged Grove here, so a green source, picking up the lands early just because, you know, they're very high upside, low downside, and he didn't seem too enticed by anything else in this pack. So Ugin's Mastery, a commander card that I think a lot of people are not too familiar with. Getting a 2/2 every turn is a way to grind out a slower game. And then Sky Sovereign, I mean, this is a beating on any kind of stall if you have time. You know, getting the free Lightning Bolt every turn. It plays good defense the turn you play it, and crewing these kind of big things is a pretty low cost. Compared to a creature, it's not much of a downside for it to be a vehicle, and the fact that it's protected from a lot of creature removal is actually an upside. But he's looking at Tree of Tales, so another green source, another, you know, no opportunity cost card. Depends a lot on what's in the cube to synergize with artifact lands specifically. So there's a couple of things that let you sacrifice artifacts, a couple of things that trigger when you play an artifact. Those are the two key things he's looking for. But there's no really impressive affinity cards. And I think not the density of artifact lands to really go crazy with them. And a lot of the more high variance artifact synergy cards, you just don't need to pick up things to work with them because they just work with everything in the cube. So Tree of Tales, no downside to picking it up, but I could see it not actually working with much in the cube. I mean, it needs a surprisingly specific effect to work with it. Even with Tezzeret, I mean, it is a free counter the turn after, if you can play it after Tezzeret, but that might be a pretty minor upside if the boards are getting ready to wipe out Tezzeret the turn you play it. Whereas Buried Ruin, probably relevant in more decks. The option to cash it in to get back an artifact means you don't actually need much of a top end. So it's no use if you're flooding out in the early game. But a Buried Ruin means that you can run 1 5 or 6 drop, and then if you get to the late game, just recur something rather than trying to hit your 6th and 7th lands. And with a duplicant there, I could imagine a slower game where he picks something up with duplicant dies, he brings it back with Buried Ruin, and it looks like he's going for it here. So 2 lands picked up already. See, Scavenge Brawler, another commander card, but one that's seen a bit of play in our group. It's performed very well. Kind of like a Wormcoil Engine, but a bit more aggressive. We see one of the few removal spells in the cube as well. Another one that gets around Wormcoil Engine. Mindslaver, an interesting card. It costs a fortune of mana, but it very frequently wins the game the turn you activate it. There's a lot of combos you can do to recur Mindslaver, activate it multiple times, ruin the game for your opponent, but a lot of the time, if you can just set up a board stall, play the Mindslaver, and then set up enough of an advantage from that, you can... just one activation is plenty. But Canoptek Spider, also pretty good here. Just draws 1 or 2 extra cards a turn. Pretty reasonable. So some less impressive cards here. Surge Engine, pretty great if you've got the blue mana to get it going. Unicycle, a beating of an aggressive card. He's got another green land option here. Clay Golem, a real weirdo, but it's kind of playing this fair mid-range game that might not line up with how this cube pans out. Here we see Bahamut, Mimic Vat, another weirdo. There are some specific creatures that go crazy with the Mimic Vat. A lot of the value of it is just that you can activate it on your opponent's turn and block with the creature, so people aren't kind of getting through it in a slower game. You can often set up something in the Vat to make it come together. And he's taking a look at the other blue card now that he's got a blue card in his picks so far. So one land that makes green or blue, it's going to be pretty hard to activate Surge Engine at the moment, hence taking a look at that underground river there. And you're not going to see these lands coming around very late, I think, so. Playing it safe there, not too interested in anything else from the pack there. So back on the wheel, Surge Ginger made it all the way around. So if you've got the kind of deck that can trigger it, it's pretty reasonable as a 2-drop. Pretty slow to get going. Quite vulnerable. Just picking it up. So we see another artifact land, this time just a green source for him. The Walrus if he wants to really fix his mana. And Unlicensed Hearse, a bit of a weirdo. The thing with this cube is because there's so many permanents, it's quite hard to get stuff in the graveyard to exile to the Hearse. So Hearse not really performing here as it does in the kind of vintage style cubes. There's not so much for it to exile, not much for it to hose. Grows very slowly. So not much impressive coming around. Looks like he's just going to see if he's got something that can bolster his existing cards by making the right mana that he needs. But Bronze Walrus is a very slow card. Quite slow, vulnerable. There are a couple of board wipes in this cube. So setting up with a ramp spell on turn 3, what can often happen is that you take a while to get going, and in theory, once you get going, you're really ahead, but that's just giving your opponent breathing room to play some kind of board wipe and undo all of the work that you've done. So yeah, he's got a pretty good late game with the Spider and the Duplicant. His creatures aren't too impressive on offense, and they're kind of slow to get going, so he might be having to do some blocking. See if he can pick up some more high impact early cards. And spike a few free wins with that Haywire Might. So you see more kind of filler creatures. Picking up Shadow Spear is a source of life gain. Key to the City is a weirdo. I don't think there's any improvised spells in this cube to really make it pop off like it did in its original draft format. Candy Trail is a card with a lot of appeal to it. You know, it's very easy to imagine it playing quite smoothly. You know, you cast it turn 1, you always hit your second land drop, cycle it off turn 2 if you don't have a 2-drop, but it kind of disguises the amount of resources that you have to pour into it before you get your card back. So I like it. It's a card that sells itself very well, and I think it makes the games a lot more fun, you know. Preventing color screw, making sure people hit their land drops, giving players the option of a little life game. Doing a little review of what cards to look out for, maybe what archetypes to go into. But at the moment, it looks like it's just going to be a Canoptek Spider, Duplicant control kind of strategy. So far looking like a bit more of a passive reactive kind of strategy, seeing if something really appealing comes along in the next pack. Tezzeret does do some work once it gets going, but you have to kind of set up the right board for it before you can cast it, and unless you've got some really efficient removal spells, it's not really going to come together in most games, I think. But with Buried Ruin and 2 other lands, he's got pretty good mana production. If you can maybe find something that goes along with the Sir Ginger, Candy Trail works alright. But overall, nothing that's really committed into a particular strategy. As I like to say, it's in Magic you have air and you have gas. So you've got air, that is cards that help you play your other cards, things that make mana, scry, draw cards, often have a low opportunity cost. And then you've got the gas, which is the cards you really want to cast and the cards that have a high impact on the games. So looking at his picks so far, he's got some great air. He's got the Candy Trail, and the Walrus does alright. So Chromatic Sphere is more air and Master Core is more gas. It's a tough choice because Master Core is a little bit dated by modern standards. It eats a lot of mana and resources to do its thing. But if he wants to get something more proactive going on, hit his land drops, play the Master Core. Yeah. Oh, and the Scavenge Brawler going last pick. No respect for it. It is great in a race, but bad against removal. And of course bad if you die before you can cast it. Or your opponent's up to some combo mischief. So yeah, Master Core, a reasonable shot to make it into his deck. Gingerbread, a nice filler card. If he can get a little bit more of, looks like either an artifact sacrifice kind of theme, maybe an equipment for the Gingerbread would be nice. And pack 2, so we see Mishra's Baubles, some incredible air. Dust Bowl and Rishadan Port are amazing lands. Rishadan Port earning its reputation in the Vintage Cube. Dust Bowl, a bit more of a weirdo. Generally considered the weaker card, but the fact that if your opponent does stumble on lands, you can just go all in on the Dust Bowl route, make sure that they never hit a 4th land drop, and just lock them out of the game. It's kind of a higher cost, higher upside land. Doesn't come up quite as often. So he's giving a lot of consideration to the Dust Bowl. Sword of Fire and Ice plays pretty well with his Gingerbread. Gets a more proactive game plan going. And Eldrazi Temple, there are a decent number of Eldrazi in the cube, and that would be the main reason to play them over other cards as a synergistic kind of build. But with a lot of them having Devoid, they have a huge opportunity cost in this cube, because I think a lot of them are red and green. You know, what you really want with your Eldrazi Temple is specifically the 2-mana Eldrazi. There's a couple of good ones. Kozilek's Command. The big problem with using it to cast the colored Eldrazi spells is that even if you are playing the right colors for it, it's not necessarily that you're going to have the colored mana alongside the temple to actually cast the spell. So Alex looking like he's going for the sword. The sword's underperforming a little bit in this cube because they don't actually grant protection from anything, but it's just like a pretty good rate on a equipment spell if you've got creatures that can get through some kind of evasion. Though a lot of the time you want to put it only on worthless creatures, so like 1/1 cantrip creatures, stuff that you don't mind trading off with another creature or a removal spell. Thinking about Lawseeker is a weirdo. It essentially gives you an extra first pick at a booster pack, so not something you want to pick up too early in the pack. But, so he's going for the sword here, passing up on Rishadan Port. So we've got another green spell, another artifact land, It That Heralds the End. So this is one of the cards that is quite good with Eldrazi Temple, and I think generally quite a good card. I mean, it's just 2 mana for a 2/2 that buffs all your creatures. The discount ability, not really something you want to be building around, not worth the risk when you can just have it as a good rate. Signal Pest, a cheaper card that basically has half the effect. So I think doing a review of how well he can use these Anthem effects. So he's got the Gingerbread. That's the main thing. He'd like to, upgrade the Haywire Might sometimes, but that's pretty marginal. So he's got a couple of cheap creatures to go well with hit that heralds the end. And it looks like he's going with it. So here we see another Devoid creature, a new Final Fantasy card. I'm not sure if this does much in this cube. It seems a little bit slow. Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Card is a menace. It's done some big things in Constructed. Oh, there's a Thought-Knot Seer there as well. So Soul Cauldron is just the fact that it's always up for 0 mana. The +1 counters are very relevant. There's some sick combo stuff you can do with it. But he's also looking at the Eldrazi here, so this makes a ton of mana, deals a bunch of extra damage. Very good at blocking. Fleshraker also been showing up in constructed decks. It's looking like he's getting some of the better creatures in these picks here. And yeah, Fleshraker, great pickup here. I think that's the kind of thing that can run his whole deck. He'll pick up a few cheap cantrips maybe. But yeah, those last two picks, that's given him a great direction for his deck. He's got something proactive going on. So I wouldn't be surprised if he trims some of these more expensive threats just to get more cantrips and ways to trigger Glaring Fleshraker. Sir Ginger probably not going to synergize with anything in his deck, but he's happy to play it as just a 2-mana 3/1. So yeah, it looks like it's going to be a all in on the Spider and the Fleshraker in most games. Which is a little slow. He needs to wait till turn 3 or 5 to get anything really going. If he can find a spell that makes some Thopter tokens, that would also be a good pickup. Color-wise, he's still kind of just in green and blue. You know, Haywire Might is good to run, but the land destruction doesn't come up often enough that you really want to make big sacrifices for it. It's just kind of a freebie that comes up every now and then. Surge Engine, more relevant, but quite a slow, mana-hungry card. I don't know how useful it is to block with it in this format, but I could see it doing an alright job of racing what's going on. You know, with so little removal, you can pretty happily commit the mana into it. So yeah, anything that can give him some cheap little flyers, some evasive creatures. Gingerbrute, probably one of his best filler cards right now. If you can get an Arcbound Stinger, Zabaz, any of those kind of fillery stuff, Retrofitter Foundry. Probably not getting past this late, but... So, Corrupted Crossroads, alright in this cube, not quite for what he needs the colored mana for. See, Nautiloid Ship, bit of a weirdo. Blue removal spell. And a couple of lands. So, Sojourner's Companion. This is one of the 3 affinity cards in the cube, I believe. So he's passed up on an earlier artifact land that he would want to really get something going with this, and he's got an unusually high number of non-artifact spells. But if he is picking up some artifact tokens, I could see him fitting it in. Otherwise, Nautiloid Ship, what makes it a bit of a weirdo in here is I'm not confident that creatures are going to die, because it doesn't seem like there's going to be a lot of trading in combat. There's not a lot of removal. There's not really any mill going on, so having stuff in your opponent's graveyard to exile is actually going to be a big hurdle in this cube. And we see Scarecrow, a very slow card, and a real ancient relic of a bygone era. But if you can give it time to get going, it is a free card every turn, basically. And it looks like he's considering it as an option. So yeah, the first ability often giving it resilience against removal spells. So if your opponent points a removal spell at it, you can at least cycle it off for a card. But as I said, getting an artifact creature in the graveyard, he's going to have to specifically pick up some cards to help him do that. So he has a reasonable equipment, Ariadne's Apple, Ugin's Binding. This is a brutal card for if you are playing the big Eldrazi creatures. Ugin's Binding, just like a kind of alright mid-rangey tempo play, you know, but anytime you trigger it, you get way ahead, and it's so hard for your opponent to set back up while simultaneously dealing with your new big threat. But yeah, Mortarpod, a good example of the kind of shitty creatures that you want to pair with Sword and Fire and Ice. Doesn't go ideally with his Eldrazi cards because it doesn't make a colorless creature, but it is one of the few interaction cards in the cube. Tempting Apple, also one of the few interaction cards. But for that, you really want to be going for quite an aggressive strategy, and with some of his best cards being creatures with passive abilities, he might not mind just drawing the game out a little bit. Otherwise, there's some pretty reasonable utility lands, but nothing too exciting. Microsynth Gardens, pretty great if you've got some build around artifact to pick up and you can draw the game out. The trouble with the Microsynth Gardens type of utility land is it's effectively sacrificing itself because it no longer taps for mana. And these utility lands are only good after turn 5 or so. So you don't want to load up too much on them. And yeah, he's picking up the Scrap Heap Scrounger. This is actually a great fit for his deck, so if he has any way to make black mana, it's a creature that's pretty hard to block. Wears equipment, triggers his Eldrazi stuff. Just something nice and proactive. This pack also looking pretty filler, so there's a ton of dual lands in here, but the tap lands are a real cost, and none of them are a blue-green dual, so he could pick up Otawara. I think he's only got 1 or 2 blue sources, but it's got you covered on both ends if you need more blue sources or more uses for blue mana. Hilda's Crown, also alright, but I don't think he needs to deal with a blocker. His creatures are going to be trading up or just passively accruing values, so tapping his opponent's creatures is not going to be relevant very often. In fact, something he might be more in the market for is some way to get his creatures involved in blocks just to get them into the graveyard, because he's got a lot of stuff that keys off of that if he can get cards into his graveyard. But yeah, Transmigrant, just a pretty decent creature. Endless Atlas can actually be a pretty sick card, but you have to eschew basically all of your non-basic lands, so didn't see what he picked up there. So there's nothing too exciting here. Thief of Existence, pretty decent. Market Back Walker also alright. Pilgrim's Eye might be the best fit for his deck because as a cantrip 1/1 flyer, works well with his best cards, helps him get to 5 mana. But he's giving the Market Back Walker a look. If you can find a way to proliferate that or get extra counters on it, it goes really crazy. But it is also just a 2-drop, cantrips when it dies. So we see Campus Guide, a card that's often an unexciting addition to a deck. A blue-green Jewel, which is very fitting. Could see him picking that up for sure. Grafted War Gear. Possibly better than Sword of Fire and Ice in this cube, actually. It is a way to sacrifice creatures, but he doesn't really want to be snapping them off for no value. He wants to get a little bit going, but the idea with these equipment is you can upgrade your creature, force your opponent to trade off for it. Avoid the situation where your opponent just doesn't bother killing your creatures because they're not relevant. But it would be another 3 mana non-creature play. So he's taking a bit of a risk of losing tempo playing it, but I think it's overall quite a strong card. Dust Bowl, I'm surprised made it around the table, but so we've got Witch's Oven here, which does work with Sir Ginger. It's kind of the missing piece of a strategy he can get into. Eldrazi Monument doing similar things. I think the Monument kind of an anti-synergistic card with itself. Getting to 5 mana with you really want 3 or 4 creatures in play can be quite hard to do. But when things line up, especially if there's some kind of board stall or just kind of an even board, can get you very far ahead. So we see Etched Oracle, pretty alright card. Silent Arbiter, a bit of a weird hoser. If you're playing a slow deck, it can buy you a lot of time. Pirate Spellbomb, quite good if you can get the mana for it. Spell Shrivel, a reluctantly playable card. He does have 3 blue sources so far, I believe. So if his opponent's playing any 4, 5, or 6 mana cards, then Spell Shrivel is pretty clutch here. He'd love to play Seraph. Seraph is a great rate, but that's so hard to cast. And Ornithopter, kind of ostensibly what his deck wants, but as a 0 mana play, that's not very impactful. So he's going for the Pirate Spellbomb. That is also a cantrip artifact, which does work great with his Eldrazi. So Crystalline Crawler, a weirdo that can make quite a lot of mana. I found it outperforming expectations a bit. Otherwise, there's a Sweeper or the Construct. He hasn't really got anything to pair with the Construct yet, but it's great if you can trigger it twice in a game. It doesn't take too much work to make the Construct good. Ostensibly it works with the Master Core, but untapping with the Master Core, you're already so far ahead. You're not too fussed about getting an extra card, and it's not even necessarily what you want to be doing. So yeah, he's been pretty disciplined with his top end. Lots of cheap cards. Plenty of ways to trigger his Glaring Flesh Raker. And he's got some ways to make his creatures more relevant, push through. If I would say what he's in danger of is just, not getting enough creatures on board. If he has a bit of a creature light draw, maybe draws 2 equipment, maybe draws a few too many land, things can really stall out for him. And looking at his options here, Galvanic Juggernaut is a surprisingly good card, but it's also an ancient card, so probably hasn't kept up with the current power level. Otherwise, there's another Horizon land. It is a blue source, but you don't want to overload on these pain lands. And notably, a bit of an emergency red source for his Pyrite Spellbomb if that ever comes up. And yeah, Ruination Guide, probably not worth it. Either Spellbomb, actually a pretty great fit for his deck. So, Cantrip Artifact, emergency removal spell in a pinch. You can already make the mana for it. And Mortarpod, it's alright. Nothing too exceptional here. Can deal with a mana dork or something similar. So yeah, he's done a good job of building around his Glaring Fleshraker with some cantrip artifacts, plenty of cheap creatures. If he can get it down on turn 3, he'll be doing pretty well. Neither of these cards likely to make his deck. The bridge, pretty high cost for just Pirate Spellbomb, but he might pick it up in case there's something else he wants to hedge into. Maybe Recur's 2-drop, but I'm kind of skeptical that that's going to happen so often. So, looking like he might hedge more into... Oh, and he's going for the land. And we've got a Pilgrim's Eye last pick, so wouldn't be surprised if that makes it into his deck. A little bit of funniness happening with the draft. Likely related to Lawseeker as well, but pretty minor. So yeah, we see plenty of good air in his deck, some reasonable equipment. Field of the Dead. It's a spicy little build around, but I think he's only got 5 or 6 other lands, so not something he's going to pick up with a huge priority. Null Drifter is a great card. Reality Smasher pretty reasonable as well. Assuming he can evoke the Null Drifter with reasonably often. Clown Car also a great rate. It's a little bit like Stonecoil Serpent, but things are spread out in a random way. Actually, a great fit for his deck because I've been saying he needs these creature token generation spells. So if he floods out a bit, he can hopefully roll a bunch of 1/1s and then things are getting going. Now, unfortunately, the 1/1s that the Clown Car makes do not actually work with Glaring Fleshraker and the other Eldrazi in his deck. It that heralds. So he would actually be playing it mainly on rate. The Ozolith, a very powerful card, but you need the right stuff in your deck to work with it. Could also see him picking up the removal spell here. Spatial Contortion, not super impressive as a rate, but it is one of the few cheap removal spells in the format. And yeah, some slower 6-mana cards. Pretty tough choice. Nothing in this pack standing out as an obvious first pick. So he's going for the Reality Smasher. Slot it in as a bit of top end. Good with his crafted war gear. Memory Jar is a spicy one. So with Glaring Fleshraker, Memory Jar can go really crazy. He can generate a bunch of mana. He just needs a bunch of spells to trigger it. So seems like a pretty reasonable pickup for his deck. Flesh Gorger is a very powerful card if you can cast it. A surprising amount of lifelink in this cube. And then yeah, Scrapwork Mutt, very. It's like another cantrip creature. So more air that keeps his best cards flowing. I guess the main question is, how's he doing for too many expensive spells? Because he's looking at probably playing Duplicant, probably playing the Spider, maybe the Reality Smasher. The Memory Jar might be a few too many, might be one too many expensive cards. So even though I'd say Scrapwork Mutt is probably a weaker card individually, it might be the better fit for his deck just for the sake of his curve. And he's going for the Mutt. He does have a little bit of red mana to unearth it. So we see another sword. An alright blue draw spell. Perilous Myrrh seems great here, so. But same with Mindstone and Reckoner Bankbuster. And even the 3 mana vehicle there. He's giving a bit of a look to Liberator. There's certainly some options in this pack for him. So, Night Scythe, a surprisingly good 3-drop, just like very resilient if your opponent's trying to trade off with it or destroy it. And Perilous Myrrh, great against people trying to attack with small creatures. Without a sack outlet, you are kind of at the mercy of how often your opponent can just ignore it, not let you get the death trigger when it's relevant. But it might be he's just loading up on small cheap creatures to keep his Glaring Fleshraker and It That Heralds the End in good shape. Feed it to the Eldrazi Monument every now and then. And he's going for Liberator. So Liberator is a flyer that grows a bit over time. Gives him some utility with the flash. But without counterspells in the format, it's not as crazy. Cogwork Librarian, not so good in the third pack, but still got a bit of utility for him. And Titan's Presence, it's an alright removal spell. So I think just checking the power of the average creature in his deck, there is a bit of a problem with it that often you can't exile what you want to hit, and 3 mana is already not a great rate for a removal spell in this kind of format. And then Eldrazi Mimic, just a cheap creature that sometimes gets buffed on your turn. I'm not sure what the spells count is at, but he might be hitting high enough redundancy on cheap spells that he can speculate on something a bit riskier. He doesn't have to just pick reasonable 2-drops. He can take a removal spell that might be good in the right matchup. So yeah, he's saving this pick for the next pack. Cogwork Librarian means he'll get 2 picks out of a later pack. So Zabaz is a good cheap evasive creature. Mercile also does alright. Abstruse Archaic, I'm not sure it works with anything in his deck, and it might be too slow. So he can copy, Glaring Fleshraker. It's actually quite good with Duplicant, but we have Ululek, which is very easy to cast in this cube because almost all the lands produce colorless mana. It synergizes with the large Eldrazi that have cast triggers, which Alex doesn't have, but he might just be in the market for for something a bit more speculative. It does work with Glaring Fleshraker, so if he can stack it up so that he's paying extra mana to get a couple extra triggers, that can be relevant. But he's gonna, looks like he's gonna just go for another cheap aggressive creature. Nothing too unusual, just a flyer to put some equipment on. Pick up buffs from his It That Heralds. So there's another fixing land. These filter lands are a real weirdo in the cube because they don't actually make blue or red mana unless you already have blue or red mana. So there's some situations where you have your blue-green jewel and you use it to make red mana, but it's mainly for paying the really prohibitive double pip costs. I think that's an altar there. Don't recognize what card that is, but we'll fill you in on the screen. It says Mutavault, quite a strong creature land. Yavimaya Coast, more fixing for his colored cards. Arcbound Stinger, another cheap flyer for him to work with. And Tanglewire, a bit of a classic vintage cube card. Denies your opponent a lot of mana if you can get it down before they have any creatures in play. It's gotten worse as the cheap creatures have gotten stronger, but there's still a couple of times you can catch your opponent off guard with it. But he's going to go for the fixing land. Some consideration towards using the Cogwork Librarian before it's too late. And here we see another one of the Affinity 4/4s. A bunch of expensive cards, so he's probably not very interested in these ones. Khan is a weird one to build your curve around because it's a 5-drop that makes even more mana, so in theory it's good with other 5-drops. In practice you can often just die with both of them in your hand. And Ether Jacket, mediocre creature, bit of removal spell utility, but it's very slow. And I think this is a bit of a review of the top end. Does he have space for another 5-drop? Is there anything his deck is particularly interested in as well? Because what he wants mainly are these cheap artifact spells, and they've pretty much all dried up from the pack. So he's kind of picking at the scraps here, seeing what is the least bad card in the pack. You know, Ether Jacket fits with his plan, but it's a pretty bad rate. Surge Hacker Mech, alright at breaking through stalls, cleaning up some utility creatures, but again, not really at the rate that's going to make it into his deck very easily. But he's putting some deep thought into it, doing a bit of review of how his deck's shaping out. And it looks like Khan's back in consideration. And we're going for the double pick, so Ether Jacket and Khan. I'm still deciding. It is a tough choice. His deck is pretty close to completed. I think if he paused the draft here, he could put the rest of it together pretty easily. So he's not just thinking about which cards he wants, but what cards can conceivably replace something that's already in his deck. I'm afraid you won't be wheeling anything out of this pack, Alex. So he's going for the Ether Jacket and the double pick. Oh, he got the Mirror Enforcer, I see. So I think he's got 3 or 4 artifact lands, which is what you really want with the Moor Enforcer. Because with enough artifact lands, you basically start every game with 4 artifacts in play, so Moor Enforcer becomes an incredible rate. So Blasting Station, a reasonable sacrifice outlet. Currently, he's got Scarecrow and the 2-drop that he might want to sacrifice, do a bit of looping with. But I think Scrapheap Scrounger is pretty reasonable just played face up as an aggressive creature, whereas I could see Clown Car being the pickup here. One of the few actual token making cards in the cube, as opposed to just a cantrip creature or even just a cheap creature that's small. He'd love to have a Retrofitter Foundry, but there is absolutely no way he's getting it this late in the draft. And he is picking up the Clown Car. Show us the cards, Alex. So we've got another cantrip creature, another mana fixing land. He is so high on playables that even though Circuit Mender is a reasonable fit for his deck, he might just pick up the land as another blue source. Because the Surge Mech it only needs 1 blue source to get going, but it does need 2 blue to unlock its full potential. And with Otawara, he doesn't really want to be playing that as his blue source too often. That Stridehanger Automaton. Sorry, that altered card. So whenever he makes 1 or more artifact tokens, he also gets a Thopter. So that would actually be sick. That's actually a reason to get into more of the token makers. They're just on screen now. So if he can find a couple more ways to get tokens going, that's going to make a big difference. But not really any options for him in this pack. Yotian Frontliner, alright aggressive creature. Engineered Explosive is a bit of a sideboard card. So he's just going to go with the Circuit Mender. And Perilous Moor has made it around. Memnite, theoretically the kind of thing he's into, but you just run out of cards way too quickly playing Memnite. Unless you've got some kind of engine or really serious synergy going on. The trouble with Memnite is often the difference between 0 mana and 1 is not so big. So it's not a big cost to get something with a lot more bang for the buck. So he's checking out Sword of Feast and Famine. Also a pretty good equipment. He's got a reasonable amount of flyers he can put it on. But he's a little heavy on non-creature cards, so he's a little bit in danger of not drawing enough creatures to get his synergies going. You know, his Glaring Fleshraker can give him the tokens, but Crystal Shard also probably not the ideal pick for his deck, but it's a surprisingly annoying weirdo card. You know, really taxes your opponent's mana. The fact that you get to choose when to activate it is pretty brutal because you can fire it off on your opponent's end step, untap, activate it again. Great at bouncing your own stuff, obviously. But if your opponent stumbles a little bit on mana, then the Crystal Shard can set them back quite badly. So he's going for the Perilous Mer. Maybe. Nope, it's going to be Sword of Feast and Famine. So another equipment. As long as he can find shitty creatures to put it on, he'll be cooking. And Spire of Ishtar. Maybe a sideboard card if there's something that really needs to be removed. Phyrexian Revoker actually a pretty reasonable card to play. I could see a lot of decks where they run out some kind of equipment or mana rock. The fact that it works on mana ability is actually pretty important. And it doesn't look like he's into either of these cards. And there's a last pick by Matt Courier. So, Alex has got his deck together, and we're jumping into the first game. This is Alex on the left and Matt on the right. I see an It in Alex's hand, so I'd say he's pretty happy with this hand, and we've got a tap land to start us off. And a turn 1 Gingerbrute. So a very nice 1-2 curve. Simple wastes into a ramp creature. So if Alex plays the Herald here, he's got a pretty decent clock going. See if Alex has got a decent turn 4 play to follow it up with. I feel like this cube, a lot of the good plays start out at 5 and 6 mana. And it's just another Mer and a passing of the turn. So not a great sign for Matt here, but if he's got a Wormcoil Engine or some other big threat to deploy, he can catch right back up. And we've got Tezzeret on a stable board. Good sign for the Planeswalker. And just suiting up the Gingerbrute to a 3-3. Not willing to trade off his Herald for both of the Mer there. And happy to leave it back to protect Tezzeret. So with Tezzeret in play, he's got kind of a medium card advantage engine. He can also probably is just going to be putting up counters on his Gingerbrute. So the first lifelinker is down. Batterskull, a real brick wall for any kind of creature-based aggressive strategy. So Alex really doesn't want to let Alex engage with this Batterskull in combat because there's just no way to race it. He doesn't have a creature big enough to trade with it just yet. And in the long game, it's going to give him a bunch of extra value. But he's got an Otawara, but it doesn't look like he's got a 4th land or a blue source. So channeling that to bounce the Germ token is a non-starter. He's got his Haywire Might, which I believe cannot hit the Batterskull. But it could have taken out Matt's land on turn 2 there if he'd had a green source for it. So, Haywire Might can take out the Batterskull. So Alex really wishing he had a green source here. Considering on whether it's worth holding back the Otawara. Or maybe just cashing in the hanging back market for a chump block and 2 cards. Potentially more than a chump block, so it is already up to a 3-3. He can trade off... Oh yes, he can tick up Tezzeret, so it's already a 4-4. Trades off with the Batterskull, so pretty reasonable on defense. The Batterskull does eventually get reused, but it costs Matt a ton of mana, and by then Tezzeret's running away with the game a little bit. We see in Alex's hand also a Sword of Feast and Famine. If he can get in a solid shot with that off of the Ginger Brute, that's going to pull him pretty far ahead. Get him a ton of extra mana. Although currently, not too much to do with it. He'd like to get the Spider in play, but without a 5th land, he can't do that. On Matt's side, some consideration for how this goes in the long term. So trading off Batterskull with the market is pretty awful. He loses most of his board presence and gives Alex 3 cards. So he'd rather hang back for now, see if he can... If Alex sends it in, he's probably not going to trade with it. He is letting Alex have an active Planeswalker on board, but that Planeswalker is not as impactful as they often are. So he is sending it in, going for the trade here. And while the Batterskull is object in play, the 5 mana to equip it is really taxing. So we're playing out another mana accelerant. Looks like Matt is very heavy into a ramp strategy. And I'm pretty sure Batterskull is 5 to equip. So we're just going to rewind that a little bit. So picks it up. Next turn he can redeploy it. Maybe grind Alex out of resources, but with Alex drawing 3 cards, he's got his 5th land now. He can get the Spider going. And it looks like he's well ahead in the game here. Matt has got an 8-drop hanging out in his hand. His Batterskull is decent, but a little awkward. I don't think Alex has hit his green source for the Haywire Might yet, but if that comes up, it's crushing for the Batterskull. So leading off with a waste, doesn't want to expose the Buried Ruin just yet. He's going to go for probably forcing a chump block. Matt doesn't know what Alex can do with the 5 extra mana, but he's got to assume that there's something going on. He's got 5 or 6 cards in hand. But he's going to let it through, discard the Emrakul. Doesn't want to give up the mana acceleration. So next turn he'll have 7, maybe 8 mana. So if he top decks a land, he can play down the Cityscape Leveler. Depending how he feels, probably deal with the Tezzeret, the Sword, or the Canoptek Spider. Oh yeah, and Tezzeret untaps the Ginger Brute. So with the Spider in play, things are looking good for Alex. His Tezzeret is on a ton of loyalty. He's going to draw a couple extra cards next turn if it survives. There is Dust Bowl, but a little too late. So Alex can slam down the Cityscape Leveler, deal with the Tezzeret or the Spider. So I think Tezzeret is quite close to ultimate here. He's going to deal with that. The Tezzeret ultimate, I haven't seen it in action. Might not be as backbreaking as a lot of other Planeswalker ultimates, but 3+1 counters a turn. Plenty to keep up over a longer game. Reality Smash of the draw. So Alex has got 7 mana. It's a little awkward because he'd like to play Urza's Battlethopter into Reality Smasher, but he's 1 mana short of doing that. He could do a little something with the Sword of Feast and Famine if he gets in with the Ginger Brew. So I think just doing the math on that. So if it's 2 for the Surge Engine, 1 for Unblockable, 3 for the Battle Thopter. So he can tap out, get his stuff down, hit with the sword, untap his lands, play a post-combat Reality Smasher. Oh. So just sending it in. Oh, of course, because he can respond to the trigger by flashing in Urza's Battle Thopter, but that's the game. Too much, too early. Matt didn't have a way to catch up, and he's down a game. So Matt's deck, performing a lot better on the play. He has drawn Dust Bowl, so depending how Alex's draw shakes out, Matt could get an early Dust Bowl activation and just lock him out of the game. A Mutafold from Matt. And we'll see how greedy Alex wants to be with this Market Back Walker. So I think he's got a Surge Engine he can play on turn 2. Can hold onto the Walker till a later turn. And he does have a turn 1 Ginger Brute, which is nice. But unless he follows it up with something pretty decent, he won't be able to present enough of a clock to stop Matt from going down the Dust Bowl route. But if he's only got wastes, he might be insulated against that regardless. So Surge Ginger, reasonable clock. Going to be hard to make it bigger than a 3-1 naturally, but he's alright to trade it off for a mana elf, for a mana mer. Just a filler card. So without the option of the Dust Bowl, Matt's going to get Chaos Orb online. So the ruling we've had with Chaos Orb is you cannot move your opponents in response to the activation. So for the rest of the game, Alex is going to be playing with everything spread out so that he doesn't get 2 for 1 by the Chaos Orb. Hopefully in a way that is still visible for coverage. But the Vindicate, not really what Matt needs from this situation. I think he'd love to slam a 4-drop here, get some kind of ramp threat on early, and just outpower these small, cheap creatures. Because if he's trading the Chaos Orb for just a Surge Ginger or something, then it's not the most exciting turn 3 play for him. Discipline with the permanent placement. And there's a Sword of Feast and Famine, which will be perhaps verbally indicated what it will be equipped to so that he doesn't have to pile up his permanents next to each other. Alright, we have a Chaos Orb activation aiming for the sword. It must flip over at least once. And it did. A successful Vindication. So Matt, 1 mana off of casting that Endbringer. Ah yes, triggering his opponent's Surge Ginger. So I believe that's Ugin's Binding in Matt's hand, which is not at its best here. You know, he doesn't want to bounce 1 and 2 mana permanents. Alex's biggest creature has Ward regardless. Ah, of course, that's an Eye of Ugin, discounting the Endbringer, so he actually can cast it this turn. So, yeah, Alex, tight on mana, can't really afford to send in the Ginger Brute. And Alex can kind of pull away just by drawing extra cards with the Endbringer. However, Alex has drawn his Glaring Fleshraker, so this is his route to try and finish the game without dealing with the Endbringer. So we'll send in the Ginger Brute first. This is without evasion, so blocking is an option. He sees it dying to the Endbringer too easily. And if Alex can untap with the Glaring Fleshraker, he's going to start making a ton of mana and triggers. Maybe feed it all into the Market Backwalker and draw a bunch of extra cards for his trouble. And another Eldrazi. This is the Sire. I believe, just pulling it up now. So yeah, Alex has a high cost to playing any further lands. Fortunately, Glaring Fleshraker, he can just have a bunch of mana production and chain together spells without playing a land. But an early Sire of Stagnation is the kind of thing that Matt's ramp deck is about. So kicking things off with a Mark Backwalker here. We get a trigger, 2 damage. Checking for an appropriate token. But Matt's got some huge creatures in play. If he can afford to send them in, then yeah, so Alex makes a token, Matt just kills it with the Endbringer immediately. Clarifying that Sire of Stagnation is not symmetrical, I think. Or just a bit of banter about the draft. So Dust Bowl, not good enough against this indestructible land. Unfortunately, things lined up on Matt's side, but not on Alex's side for a Dust Bowl kind of game. And he's got to work out how he's going to break through all of these small creatures. So he can start sending in his big stuff, but he doesn't want to trade down because he's got a lot of passive value engines. So Matt gets 2 Scions that can be sacrificed for mana, but are these the... So yeah, from the Drowner of Hope. And then we've got an attack with the big creatures now that the Surge Ginger is out of the way and not going to be able to trade up. And with Alex not going to be able to level up his Market Backwalker anytime soon, he's happy to just cash it in for 2 cards and a counter. So scry 1 off Ginger first before drawing. Matt has pulled very far ahead on board. He's got way more mana, all of his big creatures online. His Eye of Ugin has been generating 2 mana every turn. So he's gone deep on an Eldrazi strategy, and he's got enough Eldrazi that it's paying off for him. I think just resolving a few missed triggers that happened earlier. Sire, not an easy card to play against when it's in play and you are short on mana, but he might have to just say he can't beat what's going on at the moment. He might have to just give Matt a bunch of extra cards. And the Herald. So two of his better cards from his deck are online. He's going to make a bunch of extra damage, a bunch of blockers. Matt has a window to try and break through with the tempo tools that he's got, but the board is threatening a bit to turn into a board stall, and that's the kind of thing that Alex needs. We've got a Scrapwork Mutt, maybe getting rid of this redundant land. More triggers, a lot of good blockers. And he's going to sacrifice 2 Scions to cast a 2-mana spell, get a Scion back, get 2 more triggers. So just trying to get 9 more Glaring Fleshraker triggers before Matt can pull out a Lifelinker or crush him with these big creatures. But he's got a bunch of chump blockers. And Matt's got this Endbringer drawing him extra cards, but without any flying or other evasion, he might not be able to close out the game before Alex can just cast out the spells in his hand and deal the last 9 points. So Alex has got a duplicant that is very unlikely to wind up getting cast due to the Sire of Stagnation stopping him from playing lands. He's looking at an equipment, which is another trigger from the Glaring Fleshraker, a bit of extra life gain, but nothing too exciting. I think he's hoping to rip a few cantrip artifacts. Doesn't look like he's too interested in casting the Reality Smasher based on discarding his 5th land. On Matt's side, he's got the Canoptek Tomb Sentinel and not sure the other card. Looks like he's pondering a very expensive play, but it's just the Tomb Sentinel. So a simple 4/3, a Vindicate if it dies eventually, once he gets to 7 mana, but nothing too impactful on the board just yet. And with Matt's Eye of Ugin, he's not too worried about finding ways to finding uses for tons of mana. Eventually, he can activate that and find if he's got another 1 or 2 expensive Eldrazi in his deck. We know he's got Emrakul. So he does have the option of just kind of stalling things out, eventually activating the Eye, getting Emrakul, and with Emrakul, he can force Alex to send in his whole board and just get the kill that way. And he's just going for 1 damage with the Endbringer, playing it safe. Another land draw. This is where Alex has got to make a decision because he's running out of triggers for the Glaring Fleshraker. He only can get 1 more trigger with the equipment. And with Matt still having 5 blockers, he's only going to be able to push 2 damage if he attacks with all. But if he drops the Reality Smasher, that is up to 4 damage. He gets 2 more triggers, so he's threatening to maybe bring Matt down to 3, but it's not enough to justify an Alpha Strike. And he also has no blue mana for the Sentinel, the Surge Engine, so not looking like combat is going to matter. And there's likely to be a tipping point where Matt can also just start sending in these huge creatures, forcing chump blocks, closing out the game before he gets killed by the Glaring Fleshraker. Agonizing over whether to play the land. And it looks like it's going to be a no on the land. Alright. Matt gets to draw 2 cards. The Reality Smasher is now available. Oh, of course. So Duplicant, I forgot the Scions can sacrifice for mana. So with Duplicant down, he can deal with the Sire, potentially play more lands if he likes. He gets 2 triggers. He could also kill the Endbringer if he's going for just sticking to 5 lands, which is also pretty reasonable. So yeah, with those Scions sacrificing for mana, he actually has enough mana that he can work off of 5 lands pretty comfortably. So he might just be pulling out the Endbringer here, which is going to reduce the likelihood of Matt getting up to Emrakul mana. So Drowner of Hope tapping Sir Ginger. It gets exiled by the Duplicant, but unlike similar looking cards, it's never coming back. The Duplicant is just a 5/5. So killing the Duplicant will not bring back the Drowner. So Sire is dealt with. Alex is now free to play lands without giving Alex free cards. Giving Matt free cards. And just trading on the Scion for a mana, playing the equipment, getting another trigger before the Glaring Fleshraker dies to whatever Matt has got going on with those 2 extra cards. So it looks like he's just drawn a Myr and a land off of the Sire of Stagnation. And this is Alex's Glaring Fleshraker sitting fairly comfortable in a board stall. So Matt is drawing extra cards, but Alex has got him down to 6. He's got some pretty reasonable draws. You know, any artifact creature is... any colorless creature is 2 damage. He's already got the Reality Smasher lined up. And even if Matt's drawing these extra cards, he does need to close out the game. So I think he's sending in the Sentinel, trying to get it in the graveyard so he can deal with the Glaring Fleshraker. Alex has a free block on it, but he's not sure if he wants to just chump block it to keep it from being unearthed next turn, but the only 1-power creature he's got is a Scion. So if he throws the Scion under it, then the Tomb Sentinel will not die, but the Scion is pretty relevant for mana production. And it is a rough play to be just throwing away creatures and chump blocks when you have a free block available to you. But from Matt's point of view, if he can deal with this Glaring Fleshraker, there isn't really a way for Alex to kill him through this board. And it looks like Alex agrees. He's going to protect the Fleshraker. Matt has got the mana to search up Emrakul, but he's very far from casting it. Currently, Emrakul is 12 mana, -2 from the eye. So if Matt sacrificed his Scion to cast Emrakul, he would have to hit 4 more lands to be able to actually cast it after getting it with the Eye of Ugin. So he's just going to go for a loot, build up some treasure tokens. Looks like he's got plenty of murder discard if he doesn't want them. This Surge Sentinel not having blue mana is a big problem for Alex because it could be unblockable, and getting in for the extra 3 could easily wrap up the game here. But I believe Alex only has 2 or 3 blue sources in his deck, so he's drawing pretty light to them. So just another mana, another land. If Matt's got 2 turns... Oh, he did draw a blue source. Oh, that is nice. So you can have an unblockable Surge Sentinel now. We get 2 damage triggers from the Flesh Raker. And I think that's it. So Surge Sentinel becomes unblockable. Puts the equipment on for another +1/+1. In for 4 unblockable damage. Unfortunately, he does get tapped down by the Drowner of Hope. If he goes for it. So at least worth forcing Matt to use the Drowner. But once Matt untaps next turn, he can at least keep it under control with the Endbringer. I think doing a little combat Matt. So if Matt goes for the tap, he'd have 4 blockers. And I believe with... actually, clarifying for the Surge Sentinel, it is being buffed by the Herald, so he didn't need to go for the equip there. But it looks like if he just sends everything in, he's got lethal. Just doing the math here. And that's match 1. Alex wins. Nicely done. Got the engine online. Opponent had a slow start and didn't have a way to break it up. Now for match 2, we are moving on to Alex versus Felix. I already had the pleasure of getting my ass kicked by Felix. He's got a very nice Arcbound Ravager deck. So I'm excited to see how it pans out. It's a bit more of a faster strategy. So Alex is going to be playing defense, hoping to drag the game out so that his passive creatures can accrue value over time. Whereas Felix's deck is more about having a counter strategy that's very hard to block, quite aggressively focused, hard to break up with a single removal spell. But Alex has got a sweet turn 1 play. He's got the Haywire Might. So there's a chance if Felix is leaning on an artifact land that Alex can get him. I think that's a green source in his hand. And I think that might be a tapped artifact land in Felix's hand. So if he goes for this, he's going to get it blown up and the game's all over. So he's going to be passing on his tap land, just playing the Signal Pest. But this is a huge blow to Felix. So Felix's tap land, couldn't play it turn 1. When he does play it, it's just going to get blown up for free. And he's going to be way behind on tempo. So hopefully he doesn't need that red or green mana for him. And probably if he draws another land. So I think we're just checking a ruling on the Microsynth Lattice there. So in for 1, Signal Pest not doing any blocking. And he's concealing the green source. And oh, we've got... So Phyrexian Revoker bit of a weird ruling here. So Pithing Needle, you can name lands and it doesn't work on mana abilities. Phyrexian Revoker is kind of the inverse. You actually can't name lands with it. So unfortunately, we don't have a way to correct that. But unlikely it's going to come up this game as Felix, he's only got 2 functional lands really, so he's probably not going to have the spare mana to actually use the Mycosynth Lattice's copy ability. And Alex is sending them in. And he's got the Glaring Fleshraker. This is really good for Alex. His best card's in play. He's had a 1-2-3 curve. He's unknown to him. He's basically locked out this bridge from Felix's side. But Felix has got... He's got a pretty good 1-drop and 2-drop as well. He's got the Arcbound Ravager in hand. And we'll start off with this. So if he does play the artifact land here, this is a little bit of insulation against the Haywire Might. At least if it gets blown up, he gets a counter for his troubles. And he could send in the Patchwork Automaton, depending how much he values the Glaring Fleshraker. He could be happy to trade it off, but it is going to scale out of control pretty quickly. So it looks like he's just going to leave it out of combat for now. We've got the Grafted War Gear. Pretty nice for turning this Haywire Might into a threat. So now that it's a 4-3, Felix doesn't have an amazing block on it. If he's feeling gutsy, he could go for... actually, sorry, the Ravager's still a 1-1, so pretty hard to set up a great block there. I think Felix is still just trying to hit critical mass here. If he can get another 1 or 2 triggers on his 2-drop, then he's going to be able to lock Alex out of combat, hopefully start racing back, and yeah, find a way to go over the Glaring Fleshraker. Considering a block here, though. So if he trades off the Ravager, he does get an extra +1 counter out of it. Ideally, he'd like to size up the Ravager so that he gets a free block on the 2-1, but with the Grafted War Gear in play, it is not going to be easy for him to completely lock Alex out of combat. And it looks like Alex is not going for the land destruction here, valuing the 4-3 a bit more. So Felix, good chance he gets 2 triggers on his Patchwork Automaton here. Brings it up to a 4-4. If he can find some way to kind of mitigate the impact of the Grafted War Gear, removing it is the best outcome for him, because if the Grafted War Gear gets killed, then the Haywire Might goes with it. And we've got another modular creature. So these modular creatures go really crazy in multiples. It just becomes impossible to manage them with combat, and a lot of removal doesn't work against them, though in this cube there is plenty of exile removal. But the thing is, with Ravager in play, you can respond to the exile by sacrificing the creature and getting the counters regardless. So this Scrapyard Recombiner, it is a 3-mana 2-2, but the fact that you get at least 2 counters out of it on death makes it really hard to work through with any conventional needs. So sending in the Ravager, currently just an attack for 2. The Signal Pest has pseudo flying. And it looks like just getting in for 2. So Alex would like to draw the game out a little bit, get more triggers off of his Glaring Fleshraker. He doesn't want to enter the zone where Arcbound Ravager has a bit of a trick to it, where you'll commonly send in multiple creatures, one of them will not be blocked, and then before damage you make a really big Arcbound Ravager, sacrifice it to itself, and then move the counters onto the unblocked creature for lethal. So Alex doesn't want to get down low enough for that to be a possibility. He's got to be quite wary of how he blocks the Ravager, because it's going to produce +1 counters all over the place at instant speed. Killing off his Scrapyard Combiner could produce 2 +1 counters at instant speed. There's a lot that can mess up combat map. So already, Felix has the option of turning his Patchwork Automaton into a 5/5, getting a free block on the Haywire Might. He's taking a gamble there if Alex has some way to go over the top here, but with Ward on the Automaton, it can't be a removal spell. And I don't think there's much that can happen for instant speed in this cube. So weighing up the block, he would effectively be trading his 3-drop for the Might, but once that Patchwork Automaton is up to 5 counters, but he's going for a safer play here. Makes a chump block. Going for counters on the Signal Pest, spreading things out a bit. So no risk of things going wrong for Felix here, really. And he's happy to just leave Haywire Might alone, because trying to kill all of the creatures that the Grafted War Gear is attached to is a bit of a futile experience. And Felix's life total really taking the hit here. He takes 2 extra damage off the Glaring Fleshraker. Duplicant forces him to sack one of his creatures. So he's going to lose his Arcbound Ravager. Strange interaction here. So if he hadn't sacrificed the Ravager, then the Duplicant would have died from being a 0/0. Here, Felix would rather have the 2 extra counters on the Signal Pest than kill the Duplicant. But that is a unusual case for Duplicant to be larger than the creature it's exiling. And 4 mana here. So the Spacecraft comes into play, makes a 1/1 when it attacks Proliferate. Quite slow. Probably not the most effective thing to be doing on this board, but it does represent another blocker. It's got a bit of safety if Alex has got a removal spell. And Felix is just priced into sending in for 4 in the air. Keep the game from drawing out too long so he doesn't die to Glaring Fleshraker. Just resolving the trigger on the Patchwork Automaton. So Alex can get in for 3 damage here. So Felix is on a virtual 4. If he can cast 2 artifact creatures, then 2 creatures really, that should be enough for him to get in for lethal. If he has a removal spell, he can go for something a bit fancy here. He can take out the Patchwork Automaton, and then if Felix crews it in response, then he can exile it with the Haywire Might. But it looks like he's just going to go for a Teferi here. Tezzeret here. Felix takes 1 off the Glaring Fleshraker. And Tezzeret quite vulnerable here because of the Signal Pest. So he's just going to cash it in for a tutor. which is pretty nice here. If he gets a 1-mana creature, that puts Felix down to 4 life. If he swings out with everything, he can deal 3. So he's just 1 point off of lethal. There is a chance that there's a cheap artifact in his deck that can get in an extra trigger, get in for the last point. So doing a bit of a review of his 1-mana options. And it's going to be Clown Car. So if he does a Clown Car for 4, he can get more tokens, but those tokens aren't going to trigger the Glaring Fleshraker. So it's not going to be lethal this turn. But each of those tokens represents an extra 1 damage on the critical turn. And just sending in with the 4-3. So going for a crew, not much point taking it out with the Haywire Might here. And Felix is happy to trade off his vehicle here because the vehicle doesn't contribute to blocking. He doesn't particularly need an extra 4 power flyer because it doesn't shorten his clock. It doesn't help him kill Alex faster. And he's not going to be able to kill Alex in time to really shut out this Glaring Fleshraker. So Felix needs to stay on the defensive, find a way to gain life or kill the Fleshraker if he wants to stay alive. So back to Felix, hoping for a top deck. Another artifact land. And we've got an Etched Oracle. So this will come in as a 3-3, just representing another blocker. Throne of Geth, giving Felix access to a lot of proliferates, so he can put a lot of power in play. If he can get some smart attacks in with the Signal Pest, this could represent maybe lethal damage and a lot of surprise damage if he can go end step activate, untap, activate again. So Patchwork Automaton not getting a +1 counter from the land coming in because it wasn't casting a spell, but getting 2 counters this turn. Attacking on the ground is pretty fraught here because Patchwork Automaton doesn't have evasion and the Eldrazi spawns are so easy to chump block. So Felix going for the proliferate, pushing in 1 extra damage. Alex goes down to 10. Felix can kill him in 2 hits in the air, and Throne of Geth isn't going to shorten it by much. Oh, the Herald? The Herald might be lethal, because that represents 2 extra damage, puts him down to 4. He now has 2 relevant attackers, but he's just going to go for a huge Clown Car. So we get 8 coin flips. I think we're just going to do die rolls odd even. For each flip, he either gets a +1 counter on the Clown Car or a token. Two tokens, 4 flips left. Five flips left. 4 flips. This is very likely to be lethal next turn at the very least. . 5 1/1s, 3 +1 counters on the Clown Car. Oh, and each of those robots represents an extra loyalty counter on Tezzeret. But Tezzeret's ult not helping him this turn. The most relevant thing is whether Felix can kill him this coming turn. Just resolving a missed glaring Fleshraker trigger. And we'll go for the Tezzeret ultimate. So each turn, Alex is going to get 3 +1/+1 counters for the rest of the game. And he can turn his non-creature artifacts into creatures. So he doesn't want to do it with the Grafted War Gear, because when the Grafted War Gear falls off, he'll have to sacrifice the Phyrexian Revoker. He can do it to the Clown car, but the crew cost of that is pretty minor. Likely he'll just be suiting up an Eldrazi spawn to make sure he's got enough lethal attackers. And those 1/1s do not have flying. Separating out the 1/1 that has counters on it for clarity. And passing back to Felix for likely the last turn of the game. He can get a Proliferate up to getting in for 6 damage. The Microsynth Gardens miss isn't going to matter this game. And he's going to cash in the Etched Oracle for 3 more cards, see if he can find something there. An Arcbound Ravager would be lethal here. Merce Grappling helps a bit. The Ether Spark also represents a lot. If he just had a Sacrifice outlet, he could really get something... Oh, of course. So, looks like Throne of Geth is going to be lethal. So, he sacrifices the Patchwork Automaton, moves the counters onto the Ozolith, onto the Signal Pest. The Signal Pest has more than 10 power, and it flies through in the air for lethal. So, Felix absolutely stealing the game with a final turn lethal in the air. That is brutal. And with that, we've got Alex on the play again. Starting off with a simple flyer. And this time Felix has got a less awkward start. Untap land into 1-drop. He's got at least another land rolled up, a removal spell for the 1/1. We've got an unblockable Gingerbrute, 2 coming across. About as aggressive a start as Alex's deck is capable of, but it's not going to scale in the same way that Felix's does. So when Felix has got 2 or 3 creatures in play, they often interlock in a way that makes it very hard to block, very hard to deal with them. So dealing with the flyer so that he's forcing Alex to spend mana on evasion later on if he wants it. And Alex stuck on 2 lands. He's got the Lord, so he's pulling ahead in the race. But with Glaring Fleshraker in hand, missing a land is pretty rough for him. He really wants to get that online before anything else. It generates a ton of mana, a ton of triggers. You really don't want that to be one of the last spells you cast. So he's got 2 other 3-mana spells in his hand. Not sure if he's actually got a 2-drop ready if he misses another land drop. And I think Felix would be okay trading the Recombiner with the Gingerbrute if Alex offers it up. Not ideal for him, but he can really get something going here. And it looks like Alex is not happy with that trade. He's going to leave it back for now. Land number 4 for Felix. He's got the Ozolith, which is something that really goes crazy in his counters deck. So the key thing is that anytime one of his creatures with counters on it dies, he gets a whole ton of value from all these passive abilities. So Alex is not going to be able to manage the battlefield through combat. He's going to need some kind of exile removal or disruption to really interact with this. If he can deal with the Ozolith, it's a bit more manageable. But currently, the Scrapyard Recombiner, if it dies, contributes an extra 4+1 counters to the battlefield. And if Felix has anything that interacts with those +1 counters, it goes pretty crazy, as we see with the Walking Ballista in his hand. So there's Throne of Geth, not even giving Alex the option of... so Scrapyard Recombiner, using its ability to sacrifice an artifact and tutor up a construct. Iron Apprentice is functionally another modular creature. So Felix has got the whole engine running here. He's got 2 modular creatures. I think he's got the 4th land rolled up there. He's got ways to sacrifice them. He's got permanents that give him huge benefits when anything with +1 counters on it die. And he's going to go for revving it up. So 1 counter on the Ozolith, 1 counter on a creature. Then the Proliferate resolves. So his Iron Apprentice has added 5+1 counters to the battlefield. If he amps up the Merc Grappling, he's coming ahead in the race. And just deciding how he wants to spray out the counters, because putting counters on a modular creature, very safe bet. Anything goes wrong, you get way more counters. And yeah, not going to take the trade with the Merc Grappling. Alex has landed the Glaring Flesh Raker. He can start churning out chump blockers. It's pretty close. But with Felix's engine online, there isn't really a way for Alex to regain position on the board. Oh, and Walking Ballista is online. Felix can add quite a lot of counters to it. So he gets a Proliferate plus 5, 10... I believe he can get 13 counters on the Walking Ballista if he goes all in. Probably going for a more modest 12, but with 12 counters he can kill almost every creature that Alex has. Crucially, interacting with the Glaring Flesh Raker, which I think is Alex's best shot of keeping up in this game. Once the Flesh Raker's off the battlefield, nothing that Alex is doing is keeping up with Felix's counter strategy. I think he's just doing a bit of counters math himself. So, if he sacrifices the Recombiner, he gets 5 counters on the Ozolith, 5 counters on the Walking Ballista, then he proliferates. So the Ballista's on 7, the Ozolith is on 5, he moves the counters over, the Ballista's on 12 counters. He can remove 4 counters to remove Alex's 2 best creatures, and then he has an 8/8 that can snipe creatures at will. Which I'd say is a pretty good turn 5. So he's going to start off with a Recombiner activation. See if there's a construct to get. Reminding us all that Arcbound Ravager is in fact a beast and not a construct. Some surprising creature types on these artifact creatures. So prior to, I believe, Mirrodin, artifact creatures actually didn't have a creature type. They were just robots. Now there's kind of a split. Some of them have types that reflect that they are robots. Some of them have types reflecting what they appear to be or what they are imitations of. So Felix just setting this all up in the right order, getting some extra counters off of his proliferates. But the walking ballista interaction here is really going to go crazy. So with the Throne of Geth, death triggers from creatures sacrificed happens before the proliferation. So Aspiring Construct adds the counter. Proliferate there. Merc Grappling sacrifices itself to contribute 3 more counters to the operation. 4 more counters. We move the counters onto the Walking Ballista. And that's 2 to take down the Herald, 2 to take down the Fleshraker. Alex's board is all cleaned up, and with only 3 lands in play, there's very little you can do to rebuild. Facing down a 6/6 with an awesome death trigger, a 3/3 walking removal spell. It's looking like this match is over for Alex. Keep him honest. Get in for the extra 3. So we see Etched Oracle and Simian Simulacrum here. Etched Oracle, unplayable without colored mana. But Simian Simulacrum, still very good here. So he's going to set up counters on itself so that he can get more proliferate triggers. And it looks like Alex is ready to throw in the towel. Doesn't see a way out. That is rough. Felix's deck is a monster. He's put it together very well. And once the engine is up and going, it's very hard to stop. So Felix is moving on to the finals. Excited to see if his +1 counter strategy can carry him through the last match. So these kind of synergistic plans, if they have a weakness, it's typically to do with their need for critical mass. So a discard spell, some removal spells, especially if you can remove a creature without killing it, because modular is a very powerful death trigger. So you want to break up their sacrifice outlets, use things like bounce spells. Phyrexian Revoker and Ether Spellbomb unfortunately didn't line up for Alex in that match, but could have been great tools. A lot of the removal spells in the cube exile, so that's a way to get around the death triggers. And we're kicking things off with Riley on the left, Felix on the play. Both players took a mulligan, and Felix has drawn Arcbound Ravager, which is a huge boon for him. Looks like Riley is on a bit of a slower strategy. He's got a 5-drop, a 7-drop, and an X-Spell in his hand. But Ugin's Labyrinth, very powerful land. He's going to get a 3/3 on turn 2. This extra mana is going to keep him ahead of what Felix is doing, maybe. So the second modular creature has shown up. He's got a safe attack with the Arcbound Ravager here, because he can turn it into a 4/4 at instant speed. But he's going to leave it back for block. Probably not go for that play unless absolutely necessary. If he can land the Ozolith, things get a lot stronger. If he can get a proliferate trigger, that also makes a big difference. Just pulling up the life counter here. But Riley's decently well set up. He can't cast anything this turn, but he can fire off a draw spell next turn. Oh, sorry, he can get Boom Pile down this turn. And Boom Pile actually one of the better forms of interaction against this deck. The death triggers are not effective if everything dies at the same time. So what he can do is he can force Felix to commit into the sweeper, get everything in one go, and then once Felix is trying to rebuild, his deck doesn't quite do anything until he's cast 3 or 4 spells. So if Riley can break up his critical mass, then that'll set his deck back quite significantly. So Boom Pile, a bit of a weirdo. You don't want to play around it too fully because you don't know how many turns it's going to take to explode. And the owner of it is kind of incentivized to just pop it off at the first opportunity in case they have a string of bad luck and can't sacrifice it. But agonizing over the decision, it's quite an ambiguous one. If he commits into the Boom Pile and it goes off, it might be all over for him. So we've got the Simulacrum. We got a die roll to determine if everything dies. And he's just going to take 3. So probably angling for a Scrapyard Recombiner activation using the Simian Simulacrum. Get up to this critical mass. But just taking 3 this turn. And this is also a good way for Felix to avoid committing all of his resources to the board. He's already got 5 power in play. There's a good chance he can get some kind of proliferate or other thing going on so that Riley absolutely does not have the option of leaving the Boom Pile back. And then just leave enough in hand to rebuild after it explodes. But Riley also might be okay playing a waiting game. He's going to draw 3 extra cards this turn. He's assuredly got some nice top end. If he can slam down a Wormcoil Engine or a Scavenge Brawler or some other 6-drop, then Felix might be falling behind after that. So we've got a Walking Ballista tutored. So this is a card that can be good in the face of many rats, not so good against Boom Pile, because with Boom Pile you don't know until resolution if everything's going to be destroyed. So while it's tempting to load up all the counters on the Walking Ballista and in response to the activation just fire them all at Riley, if Riley's Boom Pile doesn't explode, then he's just lost his board for nothing. But the extra face damage could represent just burning out Riley if he gets too greedy with the Boom Pile, or if he misses another flip or 2. So Felix gets in for 5 this turn, puts Riley down to 12. If he puts down the Ozolith, he is probably threatening lethal next turn with just that. Of course, he doesn't want to put down the Ozolith because that's his best tool. And we'll see if the Boom Pile is exploding. And Felix is going to uncommit in the face of the Boom Pile, at least get a tutor out. If things explode, he's got another construct to rebuild with. And it does indeed explode. So no damage to Riley. He's successfully weathered the first wave. Getting Arcbound Ravager off the battlefield is huge. Same with the Recombiner. Felix gets first go at reconstructing, but he's doing it with significantly reduced resources. However, the Ozolith is the biggest tool that this deck needs. So with the Ozolith in his hand, he's still got the tools to re-up. And we've got the Soul Cauldron, so he's effectively going to be able to turn all of his creatures into Arcbound Ravagers, minus the Modular, which is quite important. And Riley's firing off the draw spell. So he should have access to 7 mana next turn. Draws for turn. Thought-Knot Seer also one of the few discard spells in the cube. It might be too little too late, but at the very least he can nab that Walking Ballista out of Felix's hand. Make sure that he doesn't get run over too hard. But the trouble is, he can exile the Walking Ballista, but the Agatha's Soul Cauldron is still a really good value engine. Sacrificing the Eldrazi spawn. So Felix doesn't actually have a source of colored mana, so Etched Oracle, basically unplayable. Locking out Walking Ballista is huge. That's one of Felix's best cards. He might be out of constructs in the graveyard to tutor as well. So he's going to exile the Ravager just to put a counter on the Iron Apprentice. The Apprentice can now sacrifice artifacts at will. So Felix has got at least 3 Cauldron activations if he eats out of Riley's graveyard. So he's getting a +1 counter each turn, but nothing worth playing. I mean, if he wants to, he could pay 4 mana just to bin the Etched Oracle, get it in the graveyard so that his Cauldron is powered up. But it seems like he's alright just getting a counter on his Iron Apprentice each turn, seeing if he can roll up a red or green source, which will unlock a 2/2 Etched Oracle. And Riley's keeping things moving. So Felix had the opportunity there to use the Ravager ability to make the Iron Apprentice a 5/5, but it's a lot to be investing in such a risky block. It's got something good off the top. An Extruder. So another sack outlet. This one not super impressive. Oh, and Riley's got a counterspell for it. It's going to be exiled. Felix really just wants to get a second creature in play so that the Iron Apprentice Death Trigger does something. He's going to have a good block on the Matter Reshaper next turn. But Riley is also threatening to get this Meteor Golem down, taking out Felix's last creature. And you can see here, without the critical mass, his deck just doesn't come together. He's got 2 non-creature artifacts and only 1 creature. So if Riley can deal with that 1 creature, then Felix has just got nothing at all going on. So it looks like Riley doesn't want to risk losing the Thought-Knot Seer, because Felix could bring the Iron Apprentice up to a 4/4, feed it an artifact, bring it up to a 5/5. Oh, he has the green source. So he's going to get a second creature in play. So he gets his Etched Oracle in as a 2/2. Soul Cauldron can bring it up to a 3/3, but what he can also do is use the Iron Apprentice to just put a ton of counters on it. Maybe get multiple draw 3s out of it. But he's going to start with the Simian Simulacrum. So 2 counters on there. He's going to use the Scrapyard Recombiner, sacrifice itself, get the counters on the Ozolith. So this is really important for getting his critical mass back. If he can get a second creature, then his Iron Apprentice dying represents an extra 10 +1/+1 counters. He can get some crazy huge creatures going on. And then he's forcing Riley to spend premium removal spells on any creature that he has. And now the Ozolith just generating tons of extra +1 counters. Next turn, if he gets the Etched Oracle down, he's got a ton of card draw. But Riley's got 9 mana for the Portal to Phyrexia. Oh, this is huge. He gets to get all of Felix's creatures. Felix is back to square one. His Etched Oracle isn't going to be doing it. He's going to use the Iron Apprentice as a Scrapyard Recombiner, just to get a little something off of it. But the Ozolith... Actually, yeah, the Ozolith is going to let him rebuild very well with the Etched Oracle. So you get 6 counters on the Ozolith, 6 counters on his other 1/1. When that dies, the Ozolith is up to 12 counters. He's going to get a 14/14 Etched Oracle. Never mind, this deck is very hard to break up. And with the Soul Cauldron, Portal to Phyrexia is not going to be doing any reanimating. So, Riley's had some of the best disruption in the cube. He has stripped Felix down to the bare resources, but the synergies in Felix's deck have let him rebuild quite well. So, doing this now, getting the counters on the Ozolith. Up to 13 counters on there. So with Etched Oracle, every 4 counters can be cashed in for 3 cards. But also with Portal to Phyrexia not doing anything, and Riley's other 2 creatures mostly just being vanillas, he's not going to have an easy attack here. But Felix can also just push a huge amount of damage with Triskelion. So Triskelion goes up to 4 counters, gets another 13, that's up to 17, and then he can just shoot Riley for 17 damage. Doesn't have to go through the whole Etched Oracle process. Oh, that is very impressive. The engine back online immediately. Played around the Wrath pretty well, just didn't commit too hard to the board. And without the means to disrupt him, Felix had the win inevitably. So Felix taking a mulligan here. Riley does have the turn 1 Ugin's Labyrinth, but no 2-drop to go with it. So he's imprinted Khan. And Felix with no turn 1 play. Riley's got a lot of slow cards. He's got a Matter Reshaper to start us off with, which is good. But Felix's deck keys so well off of death triggers, it's unlikely that this Matter Reshaper is going to be involved in a trade, because it's so advantageous for Felix to wait until his engine's set up to do any kind of trading. So in this game, it is just a 3-mana 3-2. Arcbound Ravager. Piece 1 of the puzzle. And with the Automaton having Ward, it's a pretty safe place for the Ravager to dump its counters. Now Riley does have another one of the scarce counterspells in the cube with, I believe it's called Thief of Hope. Hope Ender Coatl. Getting a spell countered by the Coatl is, it does end your hope. So if he can nab the right piece and Felix doesn't have redundancy, he can stop Felix from assembling the engine here. Oh, but it's a 1-mana piece. So Decoction Module is going to let Felix make tokens, which is pretty clutch because, as we saw, him having creatures is really key to how his deck works. If he can get a bunch of tokens in play, Riley can't really afford to remove all the tokens, and with an effect like the Ozolith, each one of those tokens becomes huge. So Patchwork Automaton already a 4-4. Matter Reshaper on chumping duty. But based on the Triskelion in Felix's hand, it looks like he's happy to draw the game out, hit a few more land drops. And also with Decoction Module, he's got a great mana sink here. So Felix is just proactively getting things going. All he wants to do is hit some land drops so he can keep getting value out of his engine. So no plays from Riley. And Felix pretty happy that he's ripped this land off the top. He'd like to have a 2-mana spell to play here to trigger the module and get the counters going. But it's just going to be a 3-mana spell. And with the Automaton coming up to a 7/7, if he wants, he can very comfortably send it in. Riley's still pretty far from the Portal to Phyrexia that seems to be his main remaining piece of interaction. So, a slightly risky play. If Automaton is dealt with, then the counters are just gone. But with Ward, it's pretty hard for Riley to deal with. So Riley with 8 mana for Eldrazi spells, 7 mana for regular spells. He could play the Nautiloid ship, but it wouldn't get much done here. He's got a bounce spell if he wants to reset the Patchwork Automaton. That is pretty relevant here, but he doesn't have much of a clock on Felix. He can send in the Coatl, but Felix is gaining 1 a turn. And he's just going to leave it back for now. Maybe hoping that Felix commits a little bit more into the Patchwork Automaton. So if Riley casts the bounce spell on Patchwork Automaton here, he slows down Felix quite a lot, erases a lot of his value. And then if he can get the Graveyard trigger, he completely resets Felix. And just doing some math here. So Ugin's Labyrinth has to be tapped to return the Khan to Riley's hand. So I think he's putting some thought towards that. But Riley is also still another land away from casting Khan. So if Riley bounces the Patchwork Automaton, returns Khan to hand, next turn he can cast Khan and reset Felix's board, gaining a lot of tempo. But for now he's just going to bounce the Patchwork Automaton. And if he can line up the trigger off of this Ugin's Binding, it's going to buy him a lot of time. But he does need to get something going on. Even if he puts down Khan, Khan is only so many removal spells. So he did hit his 7th land. Still one off of casting Portal to Phyrexia. So it looks like he's angling more for that. He's got a counterspell that doesn't do much here. The Nautiloid ship, which is unfortunately just a vehicle. So he's just going to pass it back. He's not under a massive clock here. And here, Felix is showing the power of animation modules. So he sacrifices an artifact to the Ravager, gets a counter, and then the module lets him pay 1 mana to make a new artifact. So he can do that a couple of times, just paying mana to put extra counters on the Ravager. So he does that on end step, gets up to 6 power. He'd like to threaten Riley's life total without needing too much presence on the board here. So that's another artifact. If he spends 5 mana, his Ravager is 10 power. He can sack 2 artifacts to bring it up to 12. 13. Not quite at lethal yet. Oh, but that's 3 mana for a couple extra counters, and he's not committed too much more to the board, so he's representing a lot of damage here. And if Riley can't trigger the Ugin's Binding next turn, he's probably going to be dead. So just getting 1 extra damage here, doing some math if we do have lethal on board. But that's 5, 6, 7 extra points, so that would leave Riley on 1. And Felix isn't in too much of a rush just yet. So Riley does pick up the Khan. He's going to be able to trigger the Binding. Oh, and he's got the option of Binding or Portal. Portal? Oh, sorry. He does only have 8, so just going to be Khan here. But with the Binding trigger, he's no longer staring down lethal. And Felix's threats are pretty cheap. He can deploy a decent number of them, but Khan's going to give Riley wisely removing a land. Very nice. As Khan tends to do. So Felix is dealing with the Khan for now. Setting up shop. But now Riley's got the means. He can chain together some of his bigger spells, play the portal. And he's not under so much immediate pressure. So a reasonable Nautiloid chip just gets 2 creatures. Looks like Riley doesn't have a way to crew it. And we'll see if Riley can get his stuff up and running before Felix reassembles. But that Portal to Phyrexia, we saw its power last game. He's already broken up Felix's engine once, so he's going to fire off a counterspell there. He's doing a good job of preventing Felix from hitting critical mass. He's wasted a lot of Felix's mana. He's dealt with a lot of permanents in one turn. In Felix's leftovers, he does have Triskelion and Walking Ballista, so Riley doesn't have infinite time, but those are going to cost a lot of mana to get anything really going. And Riley's got another removal spell here, which is very nice. He can exile the Recombiner before it is ready to go. But he could also just cash in the Wizard's Rockets, hit a land, slam the Portal to Phyrexia. Oh, no land. Oh, that's pretty rough. He was looking quite close to just slamming the door on Felix. And the trouble is, if he takes a hit from Patchwork Automaton or Scrapyard Recombiner, he's down to 3, so the Triskelion is eventually lethal. Felix only needs to hit 2 more lands to cast it. So I'm not too familiar with this one. Bismuth Mindrender. So just a 4/3 menace. Damage trigger not going to matter here. He's going to exile the Patchwork Automaton. Just keep the biggest thing off the board. Oh, Piston Sledge is alright here, but Felix needs to get another creature in play first so that that modular trigger is good. Oh, but the Arcbound Ravager might be able to do it. So Ravager adds 3 extra counters, and that looks like it's going to be game. So he's just going to suit up the Walking Ballista, fire 5 points up to Riley's face, and that's the tournament. Congratulations to Felix. Extremely synergistic deck. Nicely done. Nicely piloted. A pleasure to watch a master at work, and I'll see you all next week.